Welcome to Envisioning Change. My name is Dr. Colin Ward,
And I'm Dr. Kim McBride.
and our podcast is designed to support mental health practitioners as they support others seeking better lives and better relationships.
Colin, it's all about relationships, right?
Yes, it is.
Let's give the listeners a little background on our relationship, the shared pieces,
Okay,
education, supervision, and now postgraduate work on doing these types of podcasts.
great, great. Well, uh, it started on a dark and stormy night. No, it
Let's
started
give a,
what, 14 years ago, 13 years ago? I can't remember.
yeah,
Was it 12?
2012. It's all about relationships, isn't it, Colin?
It is, Kim, and we've known each other for a long time.
A long time, 2012.
Hmm hmm
I
I,
remember
I was I was much younger then.
I've always been young, but I know you're going to edit this out. Um, I remember the first day we met. I was sitting in a faculty meeting at the university, Antioch University, watching you present for the chair position in the counseling program. And I said to my chair, if they don't hire him, we have to. He's amazing. And you and I started talking, and I remember thinking this is the first time I have really shared some core values around education, supervision, and client
Yes.
care with someone at a really at a very deep level. Your thoughts, Colin?
I felt the same way, particularly when you said, let's start an agency. And and I was on board. And we've been counseling together, consulting with each other, and doing trainings ever since. And
Yeah,
this particular podcast comes out of that commitment, I think, that we both share in trying to support our colleagues in the hard work and dedicated service they have with individuals and families.
yes, and what a need there is for that. Colin, do you remember in 2000, I think it was 13, when we started just one open group at the office? We had a large area that people could come into along with our clinical rooms. And we invited a few postgrad students that were seeking some group consultation. And within 1 year, we had six groups going 3 nights a week down there. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I remember what a wonderful experience it was. Not just, I think, for the folks we were working with, the counselors, but also for me. I just felt like I was being enriched by the conversations that we're all having about kind of how we support each other
Oh,
and
for
grow with one
sure.
another. Yeah.
For sure.
There was sure there was coffee and bagels involved, but that's always going to be baked goods are always going to be a component of good clinical
True.
work. So, yeah.
But on a serious note, the reason I love supervision, the reason I love education and clinical care is I grow so much from all those experiences, personally and professionally.
Yeah, which is probably why we began doing trainings and supervision.
Yes,
We've been doing
yes.
that now for 7, 8 years. And our theme of our podcast today is how come? Why is there a need? And why is supervision so important today? I think especially. And one of the things we know to be true is that currently, given the mental health landscape and the shortage of counselors across this country, it is putting an enormous amount of pressure on counselors and agencies to address the growing health needs. There are a long waiting list.
Yeah, and frankly, the old guard, if you put it that way, is retiring. The
Yes,
clinicians that I trained under, the educators that I was educated under, they're retired. And so
yes.
now I am that stable, but I'll be retiring soon too. And we have a shortage of supervisors to support the next generation.
There's an old metaphor in resiliency work. It is that the difficulty to climb is not about the climber, but about the weight that we carry.
Oh,
And counseling itself is inherently difficult. You were influenced by the stories of those that we work with, increases compassion fatigue.
mhm.
It has a tendency for us to become more isolated because we have There's a tendency in helpers to want to take care of others, even at the expense of taking care of themselves. And right now, given the increased demands on mental health counselors, it's becoming almost unmanageable. And supervision, we believe supervision is going to be an important aspect of both supporting counselors, but also retaining counselors in
Mhm.
addressing this kind of increasing demand for mental health services.
No question, Colin. Everything you've said completely supports the literature that really, in the supervisory relationship, the relationship is the number one supporting factor for positive outcomes out of the supervision experience for the supervisee. And there's plenty of research that's leading itself towards a positive influence on client outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree that the quality of the supervision relationship has a tendency to increase the quality of the counseling relationship.
Yep. No question that that was the primary factor that brought those postgraduates down to where they heard there was ongoing support groups.
Yeah,
So you and I know supervision is important. We're educators, we're supervisors, we're clinicians. But what are the facts around that? Well, unfortunately, 47% of the population, is still in 2022 was living in a mental health shortage area.
yes,
Uh,
yes,
these these individuals are living in underserved, underinsured, rural populations. So the demand is clear. the the juxtaposition of that is, look at this. By 2030, it's projected that we will need 22% more counselors and therapists in our field to fill, are you ready for this? On average, 43,000 jobs that are projected to be existing that need to be filled.
right. That's right. And if we don't find a way to provide good supervision, the isolation, the burnout, the fatigue, the low personal satisfaction that we know is associated with an absence of good supervision will only increase. And it becomes kind of a snowball effect, right? That
Hmm.
that
Right.
we can never really kind of catch up to the growing demand because the growing demand is increasing paradoxically the absence of good clinical professionals because of the weight that they carry. So
Yes, and the attrition from retirees that are coming out of our generation and the generation before us. So we need supervisors, we need good clinicians.
we do. We do.
You know, if we look at some of the research from the postgraduate counselor's experience, there was a really interesting study done by Cook and Ellis in 2021. I know you're familiar with this, where they interviewed 310 postgraduates, and this was the national survey. The shocking figure that came out of that was that 77.7% of pre-licensed counselors reported they received inadequate supervision. At a
Yeah.
time when supervisees need the most support, the
Yes.
most quality instruction and guidance and support all the way around, they experience less of it.
Nothing like being a new professional, starting your work as a clinician and feeling completely underwater. It's just not a helpful place to be, and you can understand kind of the hesitancy they may have, particularly with graduate students who've been measuring themselves on their own sense of competence. And when that gets kind of threatened, when somehow I feel a bit overwhelmed, it's easy to say, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe this isn't the field for me. And I think what you're referencing, Kim, is unless we do something about increasing our training and support and advocacy for supervision, we're only going to continue to see good clinicians feel overwhelmed and leave the field. And is that where you're headed?
If as you speak, it brings me back to the fact that given the overwhelming caseloads, working in isolation, we haven't mentioned low reimbursement rates for counseling and therapy services. And there's still that professional associated stigma, Colin, of mental health illness,
Mm,
whether it's counselors and therapists and supervisors are aware of it, or it's playing a role below their level of awareness, it still exists. What is surprising to me, that question you and I receive every time we teach an approved supervisor course here, is how do we market ourselves? Are you sure that we'll have supervisees that need supervision? The demand is so high, but the profession is so isolating.
Given the inherent risk associated with doing what we do,
Hmm.
of holding the stories and trauma and uh, trying to create a context, a relational climate where folks can begin to see the choices before them, and to do that in a place that is non-judgmental, that is
Hmm.
accepting, that recognizes my own place in that while prioritizing the place of others before me. In
Hmm.
order to do that requires an enormous amount of personal and professional well-being. And we believe the only way to kind of maintain that is through good supervision and a sense of community around that. And to say somehow that we only need supervision at a certain point of time,
Hmm.
or you and I have experienced folks have received supervision poorly,
Hmm.
which means that they're most likely not, they don't see supervision as important because they haven't received good supervision.
No,
Why would I step back onto a train wreck? It's like,
right,
I don't want to go through that again.
right.
Does that
And
make sense?
totally, and feel worse about myself when we work with supervisees that say, I wanted to reach out and I didn't want to walk away feeling bad about my clinical care, my cultural responsivity, those types of things. So I think that's one of the major factors that influence this podcast. Because when you look at it, um, and look at the facts, like you said, very few states require supervision consistently up to how many hours did you say?
Depending on the program in the state, but anywhere
Mhm.
between 2,500 and 3,000 hours.
Right. Now get this, approximately only 75% of the states in America require supervision at all for postgraduates. That's shocking.
It is shocking, particularly in the sense of how important those first few years are. Most folks leave the field within the first 3 years.
Yep.
If in our sense is that they're not receiving or have received solid support and doing that, it's kind of like, do you mind if I tell a brief clinical story? Would that be okay?
It's your time, my time.
Okay,
Go.
okay. Early in my career, I used to give, this was, we were trying to emphasize action research. And one of the things that we were doing, at least I and a couple of other colleagues were doing, was trying to gather some data about kind of what folks got most out of our clinical work. This is prior to the common factors work of Duncan and Miller. And I've been doing that ever since. I've been doing that for 35 years. And
Hmm.
I always thought my my idea is that I was so focused, particularly early in my career, on accessing different approaches, new techniques, working with different supervisors. And I always thought that when I gave the survey out, or when I asked them kind of what was most important, that they would articulate maybe something we did, maybe something that we engaged in, maybe something, an intervention or technique that maybe I employed. I can tell you in my 35 years, no one's ever said anything close to that.
Hmm.
What they say are, we felt like you were in our camp, that you had our backs, that you had faith in our capacity for change, to get better. You upheld a sense of confidence that we were in this together, and that you did that in a place that was accepting and stable to what we needed most in a life that oftentimes felt chaotic. And I can tell you that that very sense is, I think, what Kim and I have taken from supervision. That if supervisees felt like they're being cared for, they're being supported, they're being guided, and that they do that in a place of understanding, that it has a tendency to kind of translate into increasing the complexity and the conceptual expansion and the personal growth needed to do this work and to do it in a way that has vitality, both for those they serve, but also for themselves.
Yes, and they walk away. My ideal is that supervisees walk away from supervision with a stronger sense of their competence and knowing that what they don't know and that it's okay to make mistakes in order to learn because I got
Yes,
their
yes, I
yeah.
agree. And that's what our trainings, I mean, we've been to supervision trainings where they spend a full weekend on just scaring the heck out of
Mm,
participants.
mhm,
And it scares them out of the field. There are things to be cognizant of, and clearly there are scary things in taking on the gatekeeping and evaluative responsibility of supervision. And there's also this kind of enriching uh, a stance of giving something back, of what you remembering what you used to know but have moved through, and assisting others with finding their own place of understanding and and approach with others, and holding some grace about that. And I think we try to do that at our trainings. We provide a nice reflective place for
mhm,
folks to start thinking about their own growth. We use a developmental model.
mhm,
It does have postmodern tendencies to it, which we kind
mhm,
of like,
mhm.
but that's the idea of multiplicity and the idea of reflective understanding. That part of being a good supervisor is to create a place for folks to think more deeply about what we do and why we do it, and how we might do it in such a way where others might feel a greater sense of agency
Mhm.
in the world around them.
Yes, and ideally, the supervisee walks away knowing that supervision, being a supervisor, is their next professional step.
Yes. So
So how do we do this? How can we create how can we go about advancing a context for supervision that's enriching, that's inclusive, that's engaging? Well, I think there's some nuts and bolts that need to happen first. What do you think?
I think so. I think we're going to give you four things that we can do as a profession to make sure that supervision increases to have a stronger place in how we think about the training and ongoing support of counselors in our field.
A great first step is why don't we promote and foster the standardization of supervision training and licensing across all states, Colin. Specialized knowledge, skills, and training requirements that are consistent across all states that promote culturally responsive and competent supervisors.
Yes, because supervision from our point of view is a distinct field. It is not counseling, but it's focused on on providing and promoting the professional growth of supervisees, protecting the welfare of clients in the community, maintaining nice ethical standards, what you talked about, and ensuring that part of our work is being part of a growing community so that counselors can feel less isolated and have the tools to manage not just their work with others, but their work with themselves, which means that's number two. And number two is if we believe supervision to be so important and we advocate for a stronger presence and a standardized approach to supervision training, then it needs to be accessible to all mental health practitioners, particularly in
Yes,
rural areas or where they're underserved. Is that fit for you, Kim?
yep. Close that gap. 47% of individuals with mental health needs, they're in underserved, underinsured, and rural populations. Close that gap, eliminate it, ideally. It has not been enough for the professional organizations such as KCREP or COAMFD or the National Association of Social Work to say that supervisors should have specific knowledge, specialized knowledge and training. They know it, but the state hasn't converted that, translated that into requirements. I think we have to put more pressure on the states to start at a lobbying level, to start formalizing and standardizing that licensing for supervisors. Our professional organizations have already clearly defined and stated that these specialized supervision skills, specialized knowledge around supervision is required at the educational level. But the states have not translated that into requirements. And I mean the
Right.
state licensing and regulatory boards.
That's right.
If they had more pressure or more encouragement by our professional organizations and our communities in each state, they may start to understand the importance of that.
What is this podcast about? What is our intent? We hope that is about illustrating how supervision as an essential feature of counseling practice provides the needed support to one, assist supervisees, counselors to reflect, grow, and embrace the complexity of the human condition, and to do that with the support needed for developing greater layers of understanding, grace, and compassion.
For sure. And really to uphold, make foundation those multicultural responsive standards to promote best practices.
And to engage in personal and professional wellness practices to fight back against inherent dangers of our work, fatigue, burnout, isolation. There's some solid research that shows that increased conversations of wellness in supervision actually translates into increased conversations of wellness and counseling practice with overall increased levels of satisfaction by both supervisees and their clients. There's no reason why that should not be an ongoing and consistent conversation we're having with one another.
Yes. And, to build community of supervisors and clinicians that demonstrate mutual support. Um, it does not have to be hierarchical. It does not, although it always is hierarchical, right? The supervisor always holds the power differential. However, it can be engaging in a non-hierarchical way. Yep. And, we've already mentioned the importance of lobbying the state decision makers, that supervision is a distinct profession in and of itself. Yes, it's connected to counseling, but yet, and therapy, but yet it's very separate. And continuing at a community level, folks, your organizations in your state to continue to promote, put pressure on lawmakers and committees to continue to consider licensing and make it required for supervisors.
Yeah, something needed now more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd like to thank you for joining this, our first initial podcast. Kim, it was just been a ton of fun. Uh, and our support and trying to support others. We believe, as Kim and I, as clinicians, counselors, as educators, we really do embrace the idea that in community and in connection with others, our capacity for leveraging life's headwinds is strengthened.
And engaging communities that will embrace clinicians as they grow and develop, as well as supervisors as they grow and develop.
Our next podcast is to support those benchmarks associated with developing into competent, ethical, and we believe um, reflective practitioners in their work with others. And we'll provide some clear benchmarks about how we might do that with one another.
Yes, and I will add some pieces, and Colin will join in on the self of the supervisor. And we'll
Beautiful.
present that from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I'll provide a more Bohemian approach. Colin will provide a more postmodern approach that is, would you say, Colin, exception oriented? How would you, resilient centered?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And we'll do that with hopes that you might take some of that in supporting your work with others. So until then.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next podcast.